Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to CIO Leadership Live. I'm Mary Fran Johnson, Executive Director of CIO Programs here at IDG, and we're very pleased today to have with us on CIO Leadership Live Bill Mayo, who is the CIO of the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. Bill joined the Broad in 2016, bringing with him 20-plus years of strategic technology leadership in both the biotech and consumer products industries. For those of you not familiar with it, the Broad Institute is a biomedical and genomic research center based in Cambridge, Mass. It was launched in 2004 to bring groundbreaking science to the field of genomics, as well as research in areas such as infectious disease, cancer, psychiatry, and cardiovascular disease. Before he joined the Institute, Bill was the Senior Director of IT at Biogen Idec, another Boston area biotech leader. Earlier on, he spent about 20 years with the Gillette Company and Procter & Gamble in a wide range of IT and IT audit roles. Much of his career has been focused on leading change in a wide range of business environments. He's led teams and projects in more than 20 countries and implemented hundreds of projects and been involved with dozens of mergers and acquisitions. So we're going to have a lot to talk about today. In addition to his accomplishments as a CIO, Bill serves as the chairman of the governing board of the Accentria Care Alliance, which is a nonprofit community service organization based in Worcester, Mass. He's also a steering committee member of the College of Computer and Information Sciences at Northeastern University's Venture Mentoring Network. Welcome, Bill. It's delightful to have you here.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
Let's start out by talking a little bit more about the unique history and the background of the Broad.
Yeah, it's a fascinating place. It's one I only tangentially knew of prior to pursuing a role here, and which is a little strange because it plays a very pivotal role in the whole Kendall Square ecosystem that is this biotech, high-tech, academic, healthcare, life sciences thing that goes on.
And your previous company, Biogen Idec, was very involved in all of that.
And I was literally directly across the street, and today we've moved into the third and fifth floor of that building from Broad, where I started on the fourth floor with Biogen. So
circles and circles, all
I was
circling
wondering if I was
back.
going to get my old office back.
Yeah.
But the institute, as you said, is 15-ish years old. Grew out of the original Human Genome Project. We like to say we focus on three main things: understanding the biological mechanism behind diseases, developing the analytical methods to do something with that understanding, and then helping to partner with the right people to bring that into therapeutics.
Yes, and that's the unusual aspect of the Broad, isn't it? Because a lot of research institutes just do the research, but you've got that bridge to, 3,000 scientists and doctors in this area. It's a lot.
I think what you might be alluding to there is we have this. Many companies talk about kind of their staff, and we are Brodies. We talk about being about 4,500 Brodies, and roughly only about a third of them are actual employees. So that other 2/3 are affiliates through hospitals, universities, academic medical centers, other research centers, really around the world. But it gives us a great ecosystem to be part of.
Well, that's it. And I know it presents many unique challenges for you as a CIO tending to this ecosystem, and we'll definitely get into that. One of the things you told me about it that I thought was interesting was you said that for the Institute, it's quite possible to be a computer scientist and not a biologist, but the opposite is not true. Explain that a little bit more.
A bit of my shtick is, when I was in school studying computer science at Northeastern University, I like to say the hard sciences, the real sciences used to give us a hard time as being a little needy, and that if you had to put science in the name of your discipline, then maybe you weren't a real scientist.
Oh,
These
those
were the
scientists.
biologists,
They
the
say the
chemists,
same
the
thing
physics.
to engineers, don't they?
And today I like to say the computer scientist won. And for exactly that line. At least at places like the Broad, you can be a computer scientist and not a biologist. It's very difficult to be a biologist or a chemist or certainly a physicist and not also be a computer scientist.
Well, interesting. Good. I'm glad the table's turned in IT's favor finally.
I'm sure I'll hear from some of my colleagues now.
On that one, Well, you said that one of the things I know we'll get into talking a little bit more about is the role that machine learning is starting to play in. You were talking about machine learning turning everything on its head. That the scientific method used to be you'd experiment, you draw your data, and then you draw your conclusions. But now the way you're using data analysis and machine learning has flipped that model.
Yeah, I'm sure I could get some argument out of somebody who, learned the scientific method more thoroughly than my ninth grade class probably did, which is when I was last against it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it absolutely started with form a hypothesis, develop an experiment that would prove or disprove that, go collect some data, and repeat.
Right.
And in the machine learning space, it is to a large extent, it's reversed. There's still experimental design goes on. We talk a lot about the notion of designing for inference, making sure you have the data you'll need in order to infer some information from it. But the fact of the matter is you're closer to starting with data than starting with inference than you have been in 500 years. So.
How have you seen that change the relationship between your IT folks or your computer science experts and then people like your data scientists on staff or the straight up biologists who maybe kind of grudgingly have to also be computer science experts? How has that all kind of evolved?
Yeah, so there's this weird and actually quite pleasant merging of the three. To a large extent,
you don't usually hear weird and pleasant in the same sentence.
Yeah, well, because it's it's not the world that we trained in. It's not it's not the dichotomy or trichotomy, I guess, that in context to your question that we've been reared to expect.
Yeah.
It's this notion of it poses interesting challenges for everyone involved. This can be a bit of a launch point off kind of into the cloud-based world, but flexibility is what it forces on IT. And interestingly, that goes right to the heart of capital-based purchase models and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't make sense for me to spend millions of dollars buying this amazing piece of equipment that might be the wrong thing because the experiment leads you a different way tomorrow. Right. And suddenly this carefully configured, finely honed, multi-million-dollar thing is not right. But I've got 35 months of depreciation left.
Or you need so much more of that power that you can't afford.
Right.
So
I need all that power today, and I don't need any of it tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to get into a whole discussion about the cloud. Absolutely. Before we do there, I always ask CIOs about, their competitors out in the market and how their IT department, how aware they are of the business environment. But in the whole research and biomedicine and genomic research area, you don't really think of competitors. They're more like collaborators. Explain how your ecosystem, how that works.
Yeah, so there's a couple levels. One I already referred to, right? I referred to this, 2/3 of our Brodies are, they do draw their primary paycheck, if you will, if you put it that simple, somewhere else. And yet they're working here, right? So there's clearly a point towards collaboration that is in there. Of course, there's academic competition. People want to be the one who makes this insight, and there's often a great deal of money involved with the IP behind it and who can launch this company, et cetera. But we do really start from the fact that increasingly to make the kind of insights you need in genomics in particular requires very large data sets, requires a very large N, because essentially you have a relatively faint signal. And I can try to go generate all that data myself, or I could look at the world and say, you know what, there are 100 other companies in Kendall Square alone, much less the Boston area nationally or globally, who are generating the same kind of data. And what are the opportunities for us to actually pool that data intelligently, responsibly, appropriately, with consent, all that kind of stuff. But what are the ways for us to pool that for, quite frankly, the benefit of mankind?
Yes. How are you answering that question? How do you pool that data?
Yeah, so I like to say, along with our advanced technical skills, our advanced biology skills, all our understanding of science, there's actually a deep fluency at the Institute in understanding what motivates people. And we're very good at kind of building consortia among different groups who may have different angles that they're interested in, but surprisingly often, like a good puzzle, if you stare at it long enough, you can often find a path that actually meets the needs of all the people involved in a way that
Interesting.
none of you would have been able to do alone.
Okay.
An interesting example there is, so take this sharing and pooling of data sets, right? So pharma companies will have all sorts of genomic data, other institutes will, universities will, et cetera. And it can be, there are a host of reasons why, despite sharing being good, it's difficult. And one of them is things like consent or just concern about losing the data, concern about losing control of the data, not losing it, but losing control of it. And so we're pursuing with some tech partners a notion called secure multi-party computing, which essentially is doing the computer science work to figure out algorithms so I can leave a data set fully encrypted and yet still kind of extract the value of an insight from it without ever even decrypting it for the algorithm. It's not like I decrypt it in a way that allows only trusted people to look at it. Leave it encrypted throughout and still extract the value. And if I can do that essentially partial p-value story across a bunch of different people's data sets, then I got the power of that larger data set that I was after when I started.
How is there anything that has happened in, say, the past year that is a great example of what this can result in?
So maybe less about the result and more about some of the work that's going on.
Yeah.
Because it points back to that consortium model and how to tell the story to a group of people that are interested in solving the same thing so that you have a chance of getting there.
Okay.
I like to say one of the things we have at the Broad, one of the currencies we have to use are really good use cases.
Use cases, yeah.
And this is an example of a great use case. So we can kind of tee this up into, let's say, a tech community that would love to have new solutions to some of the information security kind of problems that are generally out there.
Right.
So they'll help us do the computer science. Will be a test case for what can get done. We can all talk about the good of humanity. And in the end, they might end up with a product they can sell to other people.
Right.
And we're just happy because that problem got solved in the world.
Yes, and solved with a lot of resources that you didn't have to install and pay for and so forth. Because you told me, you said if you're talking about something on a vendor's price list, they're asking the wrong questions.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite lines when I'm working a vendor.
Yeah.
After a while, we get talking. We talk about the partnership, what we could do, what we could do, and at some point,
and their eyes are lighting up at this point.
They're trying to sell me something, and I'm like, that'll happen. The right thing, if I need it, we'll buy it. It's all good.
Tell me about how one of the things I've noticed in the things that have been written about you and the Broad and the work you've been doing there is how much you reduce the cost of processing on the cloud.
Yeah.
Talk about that setup and brag about a few of your numbers.
Sure.
Because I think it started out at like $45 per genome in the beginning. What are we down to now?
So there's a host of lessons out of this little story. The one I use most often for it is so we are very cloud oriented, and that comes from our desire to kind of responsibly share our data and the whole story I just went through on the larger data sets and how we can work there.
Yeah.
But I often get into debates with my CIO buddies. They're like, well, how can you possibly do that? We've priced out the cloud. It's twice as expensive. You're going to get locked in. You got to worry about egress. What are you going to do for this? What are you going to do for that? And yes, all those things are valid concerns, and you need to do the math. But what we found is, to some extent, it's hard to do the math before you start, because it is a different implementation of all your infrastructure. And you're ultimately going to be able to use it differently. So it doesn't, while doing an apples to apples comparison sounds like the most logical place in the world to start, in the end, you're not going to end up with the same apple in the cloud that you started with on-prem.
Right.
So our example is, over the first 6 months in, we were able to take what we thought was a well-understood pipeline, a finely tuned pipeline, and remove 80% of the cost. Now, that's not 80% versus on-prem. We took 80% of what it cost us to do the first genome processing in the cloud out over the course of 6 months, because we got smarter about a completely different architecture. We were able to leverage it differently.
Okay.
So
Explain a bit more about that. It
So
sounds like an entirely different architecture, but it
Yeah.
wasn't.
No. So ultimately, what in the sense that preemptible instances are. So we're a big GCP customer, so I can talk preemptible instances versus I forget exactly what AWS calls the same thing, spot instances. But the notion of I can acknowledge that by using a cloud provider's spare capacity, cost is much cheaper than using committed capacity.
Okay.
That requires me to write my code a little differently because the way these preemptible instances work is they might get preempted in the middle of something.
Right.
And I might not be done yet.
Right.
So my code needs to be written in a way that says, well, if the machine goes away, don't assume it's your data center that blew up. Assume that it's just your instance got preempted and pick up with the last place where you made it appropriate to restart and restart. And yeah, we find that happens fairly often. So in theory, you're burning some of the savings you got because you're doing some things twice.
Because you have to wait a little bit.
You don't necessarily end up waiting. You wait in the sense that you have to go back to the beginning and start again on a piece.
Okay.
But then you end up writing your code in, think MapReduce kind of approach. You end up writing your code in a way that you've broken it into several strings. So your step back isn't all that big. It's not like you scrap everything you've done for the last day and go back to the beginning. You scrap what you did on this thread in the last 3 minutes. And
So
go
it's a
back
very
to the
iterative procedure, essentially.
you see, and you end up, you've written your code very differently. You've leveraged a different infrastructure. You saved a fortune in the process.
Yeah.
And with various methods of just getting smarter and smarter about that, we were able to remove 80% of the cost in 6 months. So that's a case where we ended up with, I don't know, you started with an apple to apple, and we ended up with an apple and a pear.
Apple to a raisin.
Yeah, an apple to a raisin. Fair enough. Yeah.
Or a pear to a raisin, yeah. And going into it, that's not something that would have been predictable. I mean, this is not something that you didn't have this in your toolkit before.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. Interesting. The well, as a matter of fact, I was. Your own CIO background, I thought, was very interesting because you said when that you weren't really prepped for what you expected the Broad would be looking for. You were not a big researcher with a huge high-performance computing background. You came in from, your years at Gillette. You've got a lot of business and auditing background, and Biogen was a great experience, but this was something entirely new. So how did that happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, you could say simplistically, I have the wrong 3 letters after my name. They're MBA, not PhD. And it's a completely different way of coming at the problems. And I'll say kudos to the Broad for thinking carefully about the nature of the challenges that were in front of them at the time and what they saw as the best solution to that.
Yes.
And at the time, I was hired because I didn't know those things, not despite not knowing those things.
Isn't that interesting?
And I think, listen, what else am I going to say, right? But it struck me as a really kind of inspired way to look at a problem and make a not immediately obvious choice for a role like this. And I got schooled quickly. I spent a lot of time going deep very early on with some fantastic folks on the staff, fantastic folks around the Institute, and really learned a great deal.
Yeah.
But was able to come at it kind of clean slate.
That's really neat.
Yeah,
that's really neat.
It was a great way to do it. I'd highly
encourage it.
In a couple of ways, it's sort of, you talk about the Biogen grounding prior to that. That's the way I got into Biogen a little bit as well, is that somebody there said, we need, we'll be launching several drugs over the next few years. We need somebody who understands big, sophisticated supply chains like Procter & Gamble.
Right.
And Procter & Gamble had bought Gillette after I was there 20 years. I had done a lot of work in the supply chain space.
Yeah.
So despite not knowing biology, I told them I didn't know chemistry. They pointed out biology was what mattered at a biotech. I told them that was 9th grade, not 10th grade.
Yeah.
So,
you're right. It was.
I didn't know that. I was even further away, and yet I was able to bring a certain skill.
Yeah. And did you extend that to some of the people that you hired or brought in? I mean, do you look more for people with business backgrounds now versus?
Yeah, I wouldn't say more for. It's not that I look for a business background versus some other background. It's more just, in a way, it's the diversity argument. And it really is just be really, really detailed in understanding what actually matters to the decision you're making, not all the things we think matters. And that goes all the way to, the vast majority of jobs start out nowadays, minimum requirements, bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And there are a lot for which that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some pretty damaging things that does to diversity of a team, and by extrapolation into, kind of the social fabric of a city.
Mm-hmm.
So think hard about what you really need and then go hire for that persistently.
Yeah.
Don't give up on what you actually need, but be clear about what you need.
Well, I've had a couple of CIOs tell me that they've got a real focus now on, they feel like they've got plenty of managers and plenty of people on a leadership track. They need to find people that are builders and makers, especially if they're rebuilding a development organization that was all outsourced. Talk about your staff. You have about 60 IT professionals on the IT staff, but of course, computing itself extends across all of Broad.
Yeah. A stat I use here a lot of times is out of the Broad employee community, I have about 400 with their own GitHub account. And I use that.
And that tells you a lot right there.
That points to kind of the phenotype that shows up at the Broad. It's a compute-intensive place. But the 60 people on the team cover kind of the normal range of what you'd expect in an IT shop. We have our infrastructure, our high-performance compute, our research IT component. We have our enterprise systems folks doing everything from your ERP to your HR systems, et cetera. We have a service desk function. We have a network team. So we have that whole
You have a fully
range.
functioning foundation
It's
for
a
all
fully
the IT
functioning
stuff.
foundation for what's there, and it's a great team. I don't know where it'd be interesting to see where I sit 3+ years in. Have I made like the midpoint of tenure yet for the team that's there?
Just about, because our State of the CIO research tells us that the average tenure for a CIO in an enterprise these days is about 5 years and 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, and there's that stat, and I think another interesting one is like out of the team, have half of the team been hired before or after me yet?
Yes.
And where do I kind of sit in that space? But we have a range of folks who've been there for 20 or more. We had a 20th anniversary cake the other day, so we have a few folks on that end of the spectrum, and folks who've just a couple months in.
Yeah.
So that helps us kind of continually shape the mix we need.
And do you see eventually, that whole balance between what percentage is in-house taken care of and on-prem, in-house and or on-prem, and then in the cloud, is shifting fairly wildly at some companies. What is the kind of the arc that the Broad is on with that?
We've been, I'd say, pointed in one direction, which is more cloud-based. We still have a very significant on-prem footprint. We have probably 75 is the number I quote most often, 75 petabytes of data under management. About 55 of that is cloud-based, and a bit over 20 is still on-prem. So a 20 petabyte on-prem data footprint is significant. The number we've been quoting, around 17,000 core HPC environment on-prem. Obviously significant networking and whatever. So we're pointed in one direction, but that doesn't mean on-prem doesn't matter.
Right. Well, exactly. And I, especially when you talk to big companies with a lot of legacy in various industries, there is aggressive, cloud first, mobile first, data first kind of plans going on, but then there is a certain part of the iceberg. That's how I think of, legacy systems. There's that cute sunny part on the top with the polar bears and everybody's all happy up there, and then there's what's really under the water, and that's often the legacy, and it doesn't always make sense to say, oh yeah, we're going to get that entire iceberg into the cloud.
I think a lot in terms of what I call code gravity. People will often talk about data gravity, but the fact of the matter is it's the code that kind of dictates where it is. We have tons of small pipelines across different areas of research that have been written by grad students or remarkably accomplished PIs over the years that assume a POSIX-based file system, for example. So that alone makes it a little hard to go throw it in an object store somewhere, throw it in a bucket somewhere. So
Well, and I was asking you for some of the examples of things you're working on, like your big business and tech initiatives, and you mentioned a DNA-based storage system. Does everybody like to talk about that?
Yeah, no, this one's a ton of fun, right?
I'm imagining something where you press your thumb to something and it reads your DNA, but that's probably not that.
No, it's not that. Listen, the notion is there are many storage formats in the world. We are all fluent in one called the English language.
Yes.
There's binary, there's hexadecimal. It turns out there's this other 4-letter code that we know as DNA. And DNA is remarkably dense, dense like nothing else we can imagine.
Here's the
at this
example you
point.
gave me: 16 grams of DNA.
Yeah, you know, it
equals-
depends. You got to make a number of assumptions along the way, but
Yeah.
you could make a strong argument that it would be possible to put the roughly 40 zettabytes of data that exists today into about 16 grams of DNA.
And that's the zettabytes worldwide. That's all the data in all of the
That's
world.
all the data in all the world. Yeah.
16 grams of DNA.
Yeah. And you could, leave it out on the floor
Yeah.
for a couple thousand years
Yep.
and pick it up and read it then.
Okay.
There are lots of interesting arguments. There's the
Yeah.
density argument. There's kind of, nature's been working on it for several billion years, and maybe it's fairly well optimized. There are some clever things you can do to take it beyond even that state, for example, introducing other bases. And there's the whole argument that it's a format we're likely to stay interested in.
Yes.
It's our DNA.
Right,
So-
exactly. So, how does this impact what the research community is doing in this area? Does a DNA-based storage system exist right now, or is it in the research stages?
Yeah, so we don't have one at the Broad.
Okay.
There have been, the first papers on this, I think, were in '96 or so. So it's 20 plus years since
high time you
somebody's
came up
kind
with
of
one, isn't it?
conceived of this idea. And
Yeah.
there have been, numerous test cases
Mm-hmm.
throughout the years. All kinds of different groups are working on this now.
Yeah.
Really, where we're focused right now is less on the whiz bang of kind of writing nucleotides and how we store them and all that. It's back to this consortium word.
Okay.
Where I'm personally am focused, and a portion of my team is kind of focused, is around this notion of how can we build a consortium so that this becomes a usable tool. I don't have to bet on which hardware implementation is actually
Right.
going to work, but we need the Linux kernel drivers so that somebody can actually call it. We need
Right.
exabyte scale addressing mechanisms. We need a bunch of coding algorithms to be written. And there's some, right back to it again, there's some good computer science work that needs to be done
Yeah.
so that it will be ready to be a market-based tool.
And this consortium is it still in the talking stages? Gee, it would be nice if we had this and let's build it, or do you have a name and a
We're-
group of
Yeah, no, no.
original members?
Yeah, no. So we have a name we like to use. Someone on the team coined the notion of oligos. So an oligo is a string of nucleotides. So we
Okay.
cleverly created the ordinary Linux-inspired genomic operating system. So
Okay.
it came out oligos.
Oligos.
Oligos. That hasn't really stuck. There hasn't really been anything
not
all
very
over
musical
that.
sounding,
Yeah,
I
you
have
know,
to admit,
It's
you
a
know.
little clever, but it's
It's
maybe
like
just
Linux took off when it got
much.
the little penguin.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
We
I mean,
don't
you
have an
you
animal.
Don't have a penguin.
We don't have an animal for it. We have started talking to some partners, and what's fascinating about it is there's actually a very, very wide range of people who could be interested in this. If you think about it, there's all the tech vendors, certainly all the storage community, the
Yes.
tech vendors, the standards setting bodies. So you could
Right.
work IEEE, you could work NIST, you could work any of these kinds of things. But then there are a lot of kind of non-traditional folks who could do it, anywhere from autonomous vehicles to drones to, closed circuit TV. I got stuck on Circuit City there for a minute.
I know,
Closed
I know.
circuit TV,
Which is long gone.
Which is long
Yeah,
gone.
yeah.
But there are lots of ways. IoT community, like there are lots of ways that we as a community are ready to start generating a whole lot more data.
Yes.
By some estimates, 2025 should be producing around 160, 170 zettabytes per year. And the projected capacity out of the disk storage industry is that they'd be able to meet about 24% of that demand. And that's from them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to assume their manufacturing forecasts might be a little rosy.
Right.
So,
Right. Well, and I know you do a lot of work with Google Cloud, and you do a lot with Dell and EMC. Are there other leading vendors that are prominent in this right now?
So, Microsoft's done a bunch of work in this space.
Okay.
They work with University of Washington and a company out there that you wouldn't otherwise have heard of. There are lots of companies that are in there into the kind of the molecule side, because there's some interesting science that needs to get done in there. There are, by one article I was recently reading and leveraging in my talk track around some of this, is there are 46 companies, 46 automotive manufacturer and related companies that have announced autonomous vehicle plans.
Yes, I've been hearing about that a lot from the automotive CIOs that I know.
Yeah. So if they're all over that, and all of them are all over that, I have every reason to believe there will be a lot of that. Right? It's not one company out there just kind of talking some crazy idea and no one believes it's going to happen.
It's a predictable direction for
it's
the
a
future.
very predictable direction in the very near term.
Yes.
And if you look at, I think an estimate I was looking at earlier today shows by 2030 there may be something like 800 million autonomous vehicles on the road, each popping out something on the order of 4 terabytes a day.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
8 to the 8th times 4 to the 9th is a lot of data per day.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And the answers to what happens with that and what you do with it are
as it stands today, you're either
it's
going
like the X-Files. The answers are out there.
You're
right?
either going to throw away a shamefully large percentage, like without some transformative change in the way we do this today, you're going to be throwing away north of 90% of all the data, maybe north of 99% of all the data created, if we don't come up with some different way to deal with this. So.
I wish we had more success stories for consortia in the IT industry. Because I covered a lot of this when I was with Computer World and Open Systems was just getting going. I remember the Santa Cruz, the SCO consortium. There seems to be one every couple of years. There was one for a while, Rosetta Stone consortium. And have you seen are there any consortia other than the ones you're trying to work on building right now? Have you seen any work? Has there been one in maybe the pharma industry that is a big success?
Yeah, so it depends a little. It depends a little bit on what you count, right?
Okay.
So do you count, IEEE as something that establishes a set of standards so that various devices can get built, and then you have interoperability?
It's a good thing
do you
to point
count
to.
some of the stuff that came out of the original DARPA work for the internet,
for building the internet.
and what rapidly branched off to the IP-based specifications, which became the way kind of everything communicated and allowed it to launch? We like to think that we're well suited to that. We're not going to be a commercial provider of devices that store this. We can be a bit of a market maker. We have deep expertise in this particular field. We can be kind of a neutral voice in there. So to some extent, those indicators point to almost a responsibility to do this. If I believe as strongly as I've been stating that this is going to be necessary, and I believe we are well suited to do it, then shame on me if we don't make a run at it. Like that just feels negligent.
Well, all right.
So
what is the next big step in making that run at it?
Yeah, so we're at this building stage now where I'm out talking about it. I talk to folks from a list of companies on a fairly regular basis now, just kind of drumming up interest, seeing who could be in there, trying to figure out where the hurdles are going to be. There are some other angles. We talk a little bit about what is our publication path. There are probably some papers that need to be written to kind of establish a roadmap and get the debate going for what other pieces that need to come together. But we're somewhere between the end of planning and the beginning of doing.
Well, and I feel like we're due for another big success story because you mentioned IEEE and there's DARPA and there was NIST, but those are 40, 50-year-old organizations.
I had to reach.
I feel like I know. I feel like it's been a while. So that's good. And on the pharma industry side of it, you made an interesting comment that in the pharma world, what we think about a lot in IT is Moore's Law. Everything gets cheaper, better, faster over time, that it's kind of on its head in the pharma industry, which makes it makes some business challenges, I guess, for all organizations.
Yeah, so I'm built to be an optimist. But yes, some folks do joke that Moore's Law, with its rapidly declining cost density story, is mirrored by Eroom's law, just more spelled backwards,
Yeah.
which is the rate at which the cost of developing a new therapy is increasing. So, you can easily find quotes of $1 billion or $2 billion kind of per therapy to kind of bring to market. And that, of course, leads us directly into the national debate we're having on drug pricing and all that.
Right.
So, maybe the optimist side of me says, as we see Moore's law kind of running into some physical limits, like you can just only get so far back before quantum tunneling turns into a problem for the electrons, and you just can't, make them any denser.
Electrons are electrons.
Maybe Eroom's law is going to, peter out at the same time, and maybe we're on the edge of some interesting new things that might start to turn that story around as well. Let's hope. For all of us.
Yeah. When you think about the next year or two of your own agenda, what is the biggest project or the biggest effort that you want to get accomplished as the CIO at the Broad?
Yeah, so we're deep into an agile transformation right now.
Okay. Yep.
And that's absolutely, that to me is the heart of so many things, because it's not just, hey, because we have stuff all over every wall you can find. So
you're having your stand-up meetings.
We've got stand-ups and visual management like you can't believe. I went walking by a group the other day and I saw our COO and a number of folks who were standing up around a visual management board for a short-term kind of thing where they're focused on a couple internal needs. And I had a joke with her. I'm like, really? Like, you're standing up around a board now too?
I know.
That is only trivially what it's about. I see it as really about is we have 60 highly skilled, highly passionate, knowledgeable, well-trained professionals within the IT organization.
Yes.
Who am I to think that I can show up with the best plan forward or the only plan forward?
The leadership idea.
Yeah. Right. Like that just isn't going to happen.
Okay.
So if we have 60 people who feel fully empowered to bring their best to the story, to really bring all their knowledge, their unique little insights, their strange connections around the Institute that you could never predict, bring those to thinking about what IT ought to be doing next, that's why I see us on this agile journey.
Yeah. Well, there's many things I love about Agile, but there's all kinds of great stories around it, of course, and they tend to be people stories because it's about collaboration. Yeah. It's about the IT department. It's more of an external focus. Yeah. They have to get out there and hang out with marketing people and that they never thought that they were going to. Right. That must be interesting to watch from your own career projection or your trajectory about how much the expectations have changed on IT professionals and the kind of skills that they need. How do you address that on your own staff?
Yeah, so I like to tell a story. So it was, I don't know, somewhere in the late 90s based on the role I was in, mid to late 90s. We were back at Gillette and I was doing a project which was to collect all kind of sales and distribution data from all the countries around Europe and bring it together into this European data warehouse, and we were going to do something clever with that. I forget what it was.
Yeah.
And I remember clearly going to my manager, Marie, at the time and saying, hey, Marie, like, I'm a little worried. Like, when this is done, what am I going to do next? Like, we're going to be done.
Yeah, I'm working myself out of a job, basically.
All right, so that was a kid
Fair
talk.
enough.
That was a kid talk. Because I feel, as would be obvious to anyone who's over the first of those humps, far further from the end than I thought we were then.
Yeah.
So we're clearly not even closing in on it. And I see the same thing happen with cloud-based stuff. You see people get very worried that my skills as a storage admin or my skills as a sysadmin aren't going to be needed anymore. Right. That's not true. They're going to change, right?
Yes.
You're going to be pushed towards code and infrastructure as code, and you're going to have to go that way. You see it in the agile transformation. You see managers who are like, well, I'm a manager, and I own directing people what telling them what to do. Like how does that play in a world with self-directed teams? You know, your
that
skills
have
are changing.
technical skills that maybe I've gotten a little rusty on or never learned in the first place.
But there's huge storytelling skills. There's huge skills of just understanding what your organization is up to. There's huge skills of a huge need for the skill of self-introspection and just understanding what it is that you're passionate about.
Yes.
And finding a way to be doing that in your life. And a stunning amount of that can be where you are. Like, this isn't like, oh, everyone has to quit and go, I don't know, do something. No, you can do that where you are, and you can be choiceful. And, stories like the DNA storage thing, whatever, that didn't show up on anybody's project list. A little bit came out of the blue for us, and we're all over it. So...
Well, and I enjoyed when we were talking earlier, I enjoyed your reaction when I brought up digital transformation because that's one of our big favorite buzzwords these days. And you had a rather negative reaction to it. You're like, God, I'm sick of hearing about that. So what is your issue there?
It's really lack of specificity.
It's an all-purpose
It's
term.
one of those words that just doesn't really mean anything.
Like cloud?
It's sort of like cloud. We don't talk about a cloud first. Like, I have the same reaction to cloud first. Like, I just can't stand it.
I know.
Let's talk about what were the insights that came from cloud? What are the insights that come out of 12,000 different digital transformation initiatives? And which of those apply to the challenges I have? And what can we go do?
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I like that. And I've just, as much as I love talking about digital transformation, and my research friends at IDC have shorthanded it and they call it DX. Makes it sound so cool. Although I keep thinking X is experience. So I'm like, digital experience. But a lot of times it's a talk about that too. It's about customer journey and what people are experiencing. But I can see how a lot of your PhDs at the Institute would be pretty impatient with that, because it's just, as you pointed out, technology is a tool.
Right.
Leadership strategies, lessons learned. I always love to kind of hit on that. I like one of the things you said about that you're okay with not knowing the answer going in. Have you always been like that, or did you have to develop this when you got surrounded by PhD scientists?
Well, it was good that it was reasonably well formed then, because it came at me hot and heavy then. No, I doubt. I always did. I don't pretend I can remember exactly how I came into the workforce, but I doubt I came in that way. And I told you the story of the Biogen hire. It was specifically around I was there for my supply chain expertise, not for my drug company expertise. And I remember Greg saying, as he was hiring me, he said we got 4,000 or whatever it was, probably 3,000 other employees at that point who understand the biotech industry. We need someone who understands supply chain in IT. We need someone who understands that.
The business end of the stick, essentially.
So I keep getting that reinforcement in my career in kind of strange ways, but that reinforcement in my career that is, be confident in what you know, bring what you know, bring real value in what you know, and don't get hung up on pretending you're bringing value to things you don't actually know about. Other than maybe an additional perspective kind of thing.
Because you'll quickly be re-educated.
You're going to be wrong, and
you.
that's not going to work well.
Right. The I was thinking, hearing you talk about the Broad and knowing that whole Kendall Square community and all the technology brilliance that surrounds that whole community. I don't know whether talent acquisition and retention would be the easiest thing on your agenda, or whether it's incredibly tough, because you've got Google right across the street. And my son works at Google as a software engineer, and I don't think he'll ever leave. It's a very sticky company. Once you get in it.
They've got a great story. And this is where the parallel is the same. They have an amazing story. They have a great kind of orientation. I see it as an engineering orientation. That's the end we see. I don't know what he's involved with, but
engineering,
they view the world that way, which is hugely attractive, and it's people who have chosen to be there because that really works for them. That's the same story we tell. Right. We have a number of researchers from the institute leader through a whole host of the principal investigators, the PIs that we have around the organization, where students have come through schools studying because they want to be part of so-and-so's lab at some point.
Really?
So
Wow.
like it's
Yeah.
that kind of profile, and it's a huge motivation. People know they want to do this stuff. The Broad has a wonderful reputation, and that reputation we can leverage into the technology world as well. You can get to, we're moderate. I don't know how you think of 60 people. We're not that big an organization as
No.
an IT shop, and yet you're dealing with numbers. We talk petabytes like kind of no big deal. If it's a single digit petabyte, like that's not a problem. Or we rolled
Right,
5 new
right.
petabytes in yesterday, like that's not a big deal kind of thing. You get to work at a scale that you're probably not going to till much later in your career.
Yes.
So we have our ways of attracting people: mission, scale, purpose, cool
Well,
environment, white
and,
neighborhood,
I
close
mean,
partnership with Google.
and one of the things on your mission list is things like curing cancer and solving the human genome eventually, and all of that. So that certainly has a great appeal. Do you have, how do you approach diversity on your team? Because you know the problem in IT. It tends to be very heavily, for the people I see, it's middle-aged white males generally. So do you have a specific plan that you use to approach that, or how do you view all that?
So I don't know if it answers the specific plan question. The plan is, yes, that absolutely needs to be addressed.
Yes.
So unswervingly, like I'm actually pretty proud of where we are. We've done deep detail kind of across the institute, and across the institute, I think we're among the best balanced I've seen, certainly anywhere published kind of stuff. So I feel very good across the institute, and within IT, it's something we've been focusing on. I can tell you, when my leadership team gets together, the core bit of the team, there's 3 women and 2 guys in the room.
Okay.
And
Good
you
for
go
you.
the
Excellent.
next level, it gets a little less balanced. And if you look at the entire organization, it's still not perfect, but it comes a little bit. We have a problem in the middle, but that's on gender diversity.
Yeah.
Racial diversity, we have the same challenge there, but we are also very closely working on that, including partnering with a number of folks around the city who are solving problems like that. Folks like Resilient Coders, who are doing some fascinating work in that space and really kind of causing some change in that space. So yeah, we're all over it very intentionally.
Well, and I'm sure once you get your ultimate consortium together, that will be in the principles. That'll make it into the 10 Commandments of the consortium.
Right.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This has been
Are we really at 45 minutes
so.
already?
I think we really are.
Yeah,
Are we?
well.
Yes, we are. I know. I was even keeping an eye on my watch because I have a tendency to just keep talking with
Yeah,
CIOs.
no, these are fun.
It really has been. And I really appreciate your coming in. And this has been a great conversation. Is there anything I forgot to ask you about?
No.
Anything important you have going on?
Nothing I really need to say other than
Okay.
thank you so very much. I enjoyed having this conversation here today.
Excellent, excellent. Me too, me too. If you joined us late for this fascinating conversation with Bill Mayo, then you can watch the full episode later on today on CIO.com or YouTube. Or you can listen to an audio podcast of it wherever you get your podcasts. Please join us for our next episode, which will be on Wednesday, June 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern, when I'll be joined by Julie Uska, who is the CIO and the Vice President of IT for the Colorado Community College System. And we'd also love you to sign up and subscribe to our new YouTube channel, which is called IDG Tech Talk. You can find all the previous episodes of CIO Leadership Live there. And thank you so much for being with us today. We'll see you next month.